One of the most difficult realities for a narcissist to face is the moment they no longer receive the emotional fuel they have depended on for so long. A super empath naturally possesses a deep capacity for compassion, understanding, encouragement, and emotional support. These qualities make them a source of comfort to the people around them. They listen when others need someone to talk to. They give second chances when others would walk away. They see potential in people even when those people struggle to see it in themselves. Their heart is wired to nurture, uplift, and help. Because of this, they often become a magnet for individuals who crave attention and validation, including narcissists. At the beginning of the relationship, the narcissist is often captivated by the super empath's generosity. They quickly recognize someone who is willing to invest emotionally, someone who cares deeply, and someone who will continue showing up even during difficult moments. The narcissist enjoys the admiration, support, and attention that the super empath provides. Every compliment, every act of kindness, every effort to understand them becomes a form of emotional nourishment. It reinforces their sense of importance and feeds their desire to remain at the center of someone else's world. The super empath does not usually realize this dynamic at first. They believe they are helping. They believe they are loving someone through their struggles. They assume that if they continue to show patience, understanding, and loyalty, the relationship will eventually become healthier and more balanced. What they fail to recognize is that the narcissist often becomes dependent on receiving without learning how to give in return. The relationship slowly shifts into a one-sided exchange where one person is constantly pouring out emotional energy while the other is constantly consuming it. Over time, the super empath begins to notice a troubling pattern. Their efforts are rarely appreciated for long. Their sacrifices are quickly forgotten. Their needs are minimized or ignored. No matter how much they provide, there is always another demand, another expectation, another criticism. They find themselves working harder and harder to maintain peace, gain approval, or avoid conflict. What once felt like love begins to feel like emotional exhaustion. The turning point comes when the super empath finally understands a truth that changes everything. They realize that their value does not depend on how much they can give to someone who refuses to appreciate it. They recognize that endless sacrifice is not the same as healthy love. They understand that constantly feeding another person's ego while neglecting their own well-being is not a noble act. It is a destructive cycle. This realization creates a profound shift within them. They stop trying to earn validation from someone who continually moves the goalposts. They stop explaining themselves over and over in hopes of being understood. They stop chasing approval from someone determined to withhold it. Most importantly, they stop providing the endless stream of emotional energy that the narcissist has come to expect. For the narcissist, this change feels deeply unsettling. They have grown accustomed to receiving attention whenever they want it. They expect their words to provoke reactions. They expect their actions to influence emotions. They expect to remain the focal point of the relationship. When the super empath withdraws that emotional investment, the narcissist experiences something they rarely encounter, a loss of control. The super empath is no longer rushing to solve every problem. They are no longer constantly checking in to make sure the narcissist feels validated. They are no longer sacrificing their peace to keep someone else comfortable. Instead, they begin directing their energy toward healing, growth, and self-respect. Their focus shifts inward rather than outward. This is often confusing to the narcissist because they cannot understand why their usual tactics no longer work. The criticism that once created insecurity now receives little response. The manipulation that once produced guilt no longer achieves the desired effect. The emotional games that once guaranteed attention suddenly fall flat. The narcissist may become frustrated, angry, or desperate because the source of validation they relied upon is no longer available in the same way. What makes this transformation so powerful is that it is not fueled by hatred. The super empath is not trying to punish anyone. They are not plotting revenge or seeking to cause suffering. They are simply choosing themselves after spending too long choosing everyone else. They are recognizing that their emotional energy is valuable and deserves to be invested wisely. As they continue this journey, they begin discovering strengths they never fully appreciated before. They realize they are capable of standing alone. They learn that peace does not require constant approval from others. They discover that self-respect is more important than being liked by someone who only values them when they are useful. Their confidence grows because it is no longer tied to another person's opinion. The narcissist often expects the super empath to remain available forever. They assume that no matter what happens, the super empath will continue giving, forgiving, and returning. When that expectation is shattered, it creates a reality they struggle to accept. They are forced to confront the possibility that their influence is not permanent. They are forced to see that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and that patience should never be confused with unlimited tolerance. The super empath's greatest act of power is not fighting harder, arguing louder, or seeking revenge. It is recognizing their worth and refusing to give away pieces of themselves to someone who continually takes without appreciating. It is understanding that genuine love cannot thrive where respect is absent. It is choosing emotional freedom over emotional captivity. The moment they stop feeding the narcissist's ego is the moment they begin nourishing their own soul. And that quiet decision changes everything. One of the most unexpected shifts that occurs in the life of a super empath is learning that silence can accomplish what years of arguing never could. For a long time, the super empath believes that every misunderstanding can be solved through communication. They believe that if they explain themselves clearly enough, remain patient enough, and continue trying hard enough, eventually the other person will understand their intentions. This belief comes from a sincere heart. The super empath values connection, honesty, and emotional openness. They naturally assume that if they are willing to listen and understand others, others will eventually do the same for them. When a super empath becomes involved with a narcissist, however, this belief is often tested repeatedly. Every disagreement becomes an opportunity for confusion. Every attempt at honest communication somehow turns into a debate about something entirely different. The super empath enters conversations hoping to find solutions, but they often leave feeling exhausted, misunderstood, and emotionally drained. They find themselves explaining the same feelings over and over again. They repeat the same concerns. They try different approaches, different words, and different strategies. Yet no matter how carefully they communicate, genuine resolution remains out of reach. The reason for this is that the narcissist and the super empath are usually entering the conversation with completely different goals. The super empath wants understanding. The narcissist often wants control. The super empath wants truth. The narcissist often wants victory. The super empath wants healing. The narcissist often wants dominance. Because their objectives are different, the conversation rarely produces the results the super empath hopes for. At first, the super empath assumes the problem is communication itself. They believe they simply need to become more patient. They spend countless hours analyzing conversations. They replay arguments in their mind. They wonder if they could have chosen better words. They question themselves constantly. They give the narcissist the benefit of the doubt again and again. Every time conflict arises, they work even harder to explain their perspective. What they fail to realize is that some people are not interested in understanding. Some people are interested in maintaining control. No amount of explanation can change a person who benefits from misunderstanding you. No amount of evidence can convince someone who has already decided to distort reality. No amount of emotional honesty can reach someone who views vulnerability as an opportunity for manipulation. As time passes, the super empath begins noticing a painful pattern. Every explanation creates another argument. Every defense invites another accusation. Every emotional reaction becomes something that can be used against them later. Their frustration grows because they are investing enormous emotional energy while receiving very little emotional safety in return. Then something begins to change. The super empath slowly discovers that not every accusation deserves a response. Not every criticism requires a defense. Not every attempt to provoke an argument deserves participation. They start recognizing that their constant need to explain themselves has become a trap. Instead of creating understanding, it keeps them emotionally entangled. This realization marks the beginning of a profound transformation. Rather than engaging in endless debates, they begin stepping back. Rather than reacting immediately, they pause. Rather than defending every decision, they allow their actions to speak for themselves. They stop chasing understanding from someone committed to misunderstanding them. For the narcissist, this shift can be deeply unsettling. The narcissist often relies on emotional reactions to maintain influence. They expect anger. They expect tears. They expect frustration. They expect lengthy explanations. Every reaction confirms that they still have access to the super empath's emotional world. Every emotional response provides information, leverage, and engagement. When the super empath stops reacting in predictable ways, the narcissist suddenly loses a powerful source of control. The silence is not weakness. The silence is not surrender. The silence is not fear. The silence is awareness. The super empath has finally learned that participating in every conflict is not a requirement. They understand that protecting their peace is more valuable than winning an argument that was never designed to be fair in the first place. This new silence often creates confusion. The narcissist may increase their efforts to provoke a reaction. They may become more critical. They may attempt guilt, blame, or emotional pressure. They may revisit old conflicts. They may create new ones. They may test boundaries repeatedly, hoping to regain the emotional access they once enjoyed. But the super empath has changed. Instead of rushing to explain themselves, they remain calm. Instead of defending every accusation, they allow false assumptions to remain where they belong. Instead of trying to correct every distortion, they recognize that some people are committed to their own version of reality. This calmness becomes incredibly powerful because it communicates something the narcissist does not want to hear. It communicates independence. It communicates self-respect. It communicates emotional freedom. The super empath no longer feels responsible for managing the narcissist's emotions. They no longer believe it is their duty to fix every misunderstanding. They no longer carry the burden of proving their worth to someone determined not to acknowledge it. As a result, their emotional energy begins returning to them. The energy once spent defending themselves becomes available for healing. The energy once spent worrying about another person's approval becomes available for personal growth. The energy once spent navigating constant drama becomes available for creating peace. They begin sleeping better, they begin thinking more clearly, they begin trusting themselves again. The constant noise that once filled their mind gradually fades. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this transformation is that the super empath discovers something they never fully understood before. Silence is not about ignoring problems. It is about recognizing which problems actually belong to them. They learn that they do not have to attend every argument they are invited to. They learn that another person's inability to understand them is not always their responsibility to fix. They learn that emotional maturity sometimes means walking away from conversations that have no intention of producing truth. The narcissist often interprets this silence as a challenge because they are accustomed to being the center of emotional attention. They expect every action to generate a response. They expect every criticism to trigger self-doubt. They expect every manipulation attempt to create movement. When none of those things happen, they encounter something unfamiliar. They encounter a person who is no longer emotionally available for control. The super empath reaches a point where peace becomes more important than proving a point. They understand that being understood by everyone is impossible. They understand that some people will misunderstand them no matter how clearly they communicate. They understand that protecting their mental and emotional well-being matters more than endlessly defending themselves against unfair accusations. Their silence becomes a reflection of inner strength rather than weakness. It becomes evidence of growth rather than defeat. It becomes the natural result of someone who has finally learned the difference between healthy communication and emotional entanglement. What once would have triggered anxiety now receives calm observation. What once demanded immediate attention now receives thoughtful distance. What once controlled their emotions now loses its power because they have stopped feeding it with endless reactions. One of the most significant turning points in the life of a super empath occurs when they finally understand the true purpose of boundaries. For years, they may have believed that love means unlimited access, endless patience, and constant availability. They may have convinced themselves that being a good person requires saying yes when they want to say no, giving when they are already depleted, and sacrificing their own needs for the comfort of others. Because they naturally care deeply about people, they often measure their worth by how much they can help, support, and accommodate those around them. This mindset can seem admirable on the surface. The super empath becomes the person everyone calls during a crisis. They become the listener, the encourager, the problem solver, and the peacemaker. They carry burdens that do not belong to them. They absorb emotions that were never theirs to manage. They make excuses for behavior that would cause others to walk away. They stay longer, forgive faster, and tolerate more than most people ever would. At first, these qualities appear to create strong relationships. People appreciate their kindness. People admire their compassion. People enjoy the comfort that comes from knowing someone will always be there. But not everyone responds to kindness with gratitude. Not everyone treats compassion with respect. Some people see generosity as an opportunity rather than a gift. Instead of valuing the super empath's heart, they begin taking it for granted. This is especially true in relationships with narcissistic individuals. The narcissist quickly recognizes the super empath's desire to help. They notice the willingness to forgive. They see the tendency to give people the benefit of the doubt. They understand that the super empath dislikes conflict and often prioritizes harmony over confrontation. What begins as a relationship slowly transforms into an arrangement where one person gives and the other person takes. The super empath may not recognize this immediately because they genuinely believe people can change. They see wounds beneath harmful behavior. They see insecurity beneath arrogance. They see pain beneath manipulation. Their compassionate nature causes them to focus on potential rather than patterns. They keep hoping that if they love harder, support more, and remain patient longer, things will eventually improve. Unfortunately, unhealthy people often interpret unlimited forgiveness very differently. They do not see it as kindness, they see it as permission. Every time a boundary is ignored without consequence, they learn that they can push further. Every time disrespect is tolerated, they learn that accountability can be avoided. Every time manipulation succeeds, they become more comfortable using it again. The super empath slowly becomes trapped inside a cycle they never intended to create. Because they value peace, they avoid confrontation. Because they value understanding, they excuse harmful behavior. Because they value relationships, they tolerate treatment that damages their well-being. Over time, this pattern begins to take a serious emotional toll. The super empath starts feeling exhausted. Not physically exhausted, soul exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly carrying emotional weight that was never yours to carry. The kind of exhaustion that comes from always being available while rarely feeling supported. The kind of exhaustion that develops when you spend years abandoning your own needs to meet everyone else's expectations. They begin noticing that their generosity is rarely reciprocated, their sacrifices are rarely acknowledged, their feelings are often dismissed, their concerns are minimized, their needs are treated as inconveniences, and yet they continue giving because they fear what might happen if they stop. They fear disappointing people, they fear being misunderstood, they fear appearing selfish, they fear conflict. Most of all, they fear losing relationships they have invested so much energy into preserving. This fear becomes one of the strongest obstacles standing between the super empath and healthy boundaries. The narcissist often reinforces this fear intentionally. Whenever the super empath attempts to assert themselves, they may encounter resistance. The narcissist may accuse them of changing. They may claim the super empath has become cold. They may suggest they are being selfish. They may question their character. They may use guilt as a weapon. The goal is simple. If the narcissist can make the super empath feel guilty for protecting themselves, the old dynamic can continue. For a long time, this strategy works. The super empath second-guesses themselves. They wonder if they are overreacting. They question whether their expectations are reasonable. They feel guilty for wanting basic respect. They feel guilty for asking for reciprocity. They feel guilty for prioritizing their own emotional health. But eventually, something begins to shift. Pain becomes a teacher. Experience becomes a teacher. Repeated disappointment becomes a teacher. The super empath starts recognizing a truth they have avoided for far too long. Not everyone who asks for access deserves it. Not everyone who wants your energy appreciates it. Not everyone who claims to love you respects you. And perhaps most importantly, love without boundaries is not healthy love. It is self-neglect disguised as virtue. This realization changes everything. For the first time, the super empath begins exploring the idea that boundaries are not walls designed to keep good people out. Boundaries are filters designed to reveal who respects you. Healthy people do not become angry when you establish reasonable boundaries. Healthy people do not punish you for having needs. Healthy people do not demand unlimited access to your time, energy, and emotions. Healthy people understand that relationships require mutual respect. Unhealthy people react differently. They become frustrated when access is limited. They become angry when expectations change. They become defensive when accountability appears. They become uncomfortable when control disappears. This is why boundaries often reveal more about the other person than they do about the person setting them. The super empath begins learning how to say no. At first, it feels unnatural. Every instinct pushes them toward accommodation. Every habit urges them toward self-sacrifice. Every fear whispers that people will leave. But they continue anyway. They say no when they are overwhelmed. They say no when requests are unreasonable. They say no when their values are being compromised. They say no when protecting their peace requires it. And something remarkable begins to happen. The world does not end. The relationships that were built on genuine respect survive. The relationships that depended entirely on exploitation begin to crack. This distinction becomes incredibly important. For years, the super empath may have believed they were responsible for maintaining every relationship. Now they begin understanding that healthy relationships can withstand boundaries. Only unhealthy relationships require unlimited access. As their confidence grows, they stop explaining themselves excessively. They stop providing lengthy justifications for every decision. They stop seeking permission to take care of themselves. This is a powerful shift because narcissistic individuals often rely on endless explanations. The more the super empath explains, the more opportunities exist for manipulation. The more they defend themselves, the more opportunities exist for argument. The more they justify their choices, the more opportunities exist for guilt. When boundaries become clear and concise, manipulation becomes much more difficult. The super empath learns that no is a complete sentence. They learn that not every decision requires approval. They learn that protecting themselves is not cruelty, it is responsibility. Many super empaths struggle with this concept because they have spent years defining themselves through service to others. Their identity became connected to being needed. Their value became connected to helping. Their purpose became connected to fixing problems. When boundaries emerge, they must confront an uncomfortable question. Who am I when I am not rescuing everyone? The answer often leads to profound personal growth. They discover interests they neglected. They rediscover passions they abandoned. They reconnect with dreams they postponed. They begin building a life that includes their own needs rather than revolving entirely around the needs of others. This transformation can be difficult for the narcissist to witness. The narcissist benefited from the old version of the super empath, the exhausted version, the self-sacrificing version, the guilt-driven version, the version that tolerated almost anything in the name of love. The emerging version is different. This version asks questions. This version recognizes manipulation. This version notices patterns. This version values self-respect. This version refuses to ignore red flags. Most importantly, this version understands that kindness and boundaries can exist together. For years, the super empath may have viewed these concepts as opposites. They believed that setting limits meant becoming less loving. They believed that protecting themselves meant becoming less compassionate. They believed that standing up for themselves meant becoming harsh. Eventually, they learned that the opposite is true. Boundaries protect kindness. Boundaries preserve compassion. Boundaries allow generosity to remain healthy rather than becoming destructive. Without boundaries, even the most loving person eventually becomes depleted. Without boundaries, resentment begins to grow. Without boundaries, relationships become unbalanced. Without boundaries, exploitation becomes possible. The super empath starts recognizing that every healthy relationship contains limits. Even the strongest relationships require mutual respect. Even the deepest love requires accountability. Even the closest connections require personal responsibility. The presence of boundaries does not weaken relationships. It strengthens them, because relationships built on respect can survive honesty. Relationships built on respect can survive limits. Relationships built on respect can survive individuality. Relationships built on respect do not require one person to disappear so another person can thrive. As the super empath continues growing, they become less reactive to manipulation. They recognize guilt trips more quickly. They identify emotional pressure more easily. They notice when someone is attempting to exploit their empathy. Awareness becomes one of their greatest strengths. What once worked effortlessly against them now becomes visible. What once confused them now becomes predictable. What once controlled them now loses its influence. The narcissist often struggles to adapt because their strategies depend on unrestricted access. When boundaries appear, many of those strategies become ineffective. The super empath is no longer available 24 hours a day. They are no longer willing to absorb endless negativity. They are no longer accepting responsibility for emotions that belong to someone else. They are no longer sacrificing their peace to maintain an unhealthy dynamic. For the narcissist, this feels like a loss of power. For the super empath, it feels like freedom. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this transformation is that the super empath does not lose their compassion. They do not become bitter. They do not become cruel. They do not abandon their caring nature. Instead, they learn how to direct their compassion wisely. They learn that empathy without wisdom becomes vulnerability. They learn that kindness without discernment becomes exploitation. They learn that forgiveness without accountability becomes permission. Wisdom begins working alongside compassion. Discernment begins working alongside love. Self-respect begins working alongside alongside generosity. The result is a healthier, stronger version of the person they have always been. A version capable of loving deeply without losing themselves. A version capable of helping others without abandoning their own needs. A version capable of offering grace without accepting abuse. A version capable of showing compassion without surrendering boundaries. The narcissist may never understand this transformation. They may continue viewing boundaries as rejection. They may continue viewing self-respect as rebellion. They may continue viewing independence as disloyalty. But the super empath no longer measures their choices according to someone else's interpretation. They understand that protecting their peace is not selfish. Protecting their peace is necessary. Protecting their mental health is necessary. Protecting their emotional well-being is necessary. Protecting their identity is necessary. For the first time in a very long time, they stop shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. They stop apologizing for having needs. They stop feeling guilty for valuing themselves. They stop carrying responsibilities that belong to other people. And with every boundary they establish, a little more freedom returns, a little more confidence returns, a little more peace returns, a little more self-respect returns. The super empath finally understands that boundaries are not punishments. They are acts of self-honor. They are declarations of worth. They are reminders that love should never require self-destruction. They are evidence that compassion and strength can exist in the same heart. And once that lesson is fully learned, the super empath becomes far more difficult to manipulate because they have discovered something the narcissist never wanted them to know. Their kindness is powerful, but their boundaries are what protect that power. One of the most powerful and unexpected things a super empath can do is heal, grow, and move forward with their life. While many people assume that confronting a narcissist, exposing their behavior, or seeking revenge is what hurts them the most, the truth is often very different. A narcissist usually expects emotional reactions. They expect anger, tears, arguments, and attempts to prove a point. They expect to remain the center of attention even after the relationship has become unhealthy. What they rarely expect is for the person they once influenced so deeply to rise, recover, and build a fulfilling life without them. The journey toward healing is not an easy one for a super empath. In fact, it may be one of the most difficult challenges they ever face. Because they care so deeply, they often spend a long time trying to understand what happened. They replay conversations in their minds. They analyze situations repeatedly. They wonder if there was something they could have done differently. They search for answers, closure, and explanations. Their natural empathy causes them to look beneath the surface of every conflict. They try to understand the pain, motivations, and insecurities that may have contributed to the narcissist's behavior. For a period of time, this reflection can be helpful. It allows the super empath to process their experiences and learn valuable lessons. However, healing truly begins when they stop focusing entirely on the narcissist and start focusing on themselves. This shift may seem simple, but it represents a profound transformation. Instead of asking why someone treated them poorly, they begin asking how they can rebuild their confidence. Instead of investing all their energy into understanding another person, they invest that energy into understanding themselves. At first, this process can feel uncomfortable. Many super empaths have spent years placing other people's needs above their own. They have become accustomed to giving, helping, fixing, and supporting. Prioritizing themselves may feel unfamiliar. They may even feel guilty for doing so. Yet as they continue moving forward, they begin realizing something important. Taking care of themselves is not selfish, it is necessary. They start reconnecting with parts of themselves that were neglected during the unhealthy relationship. They rediscover interests they abandoned. They revisit goals they postponed. They reconnect with friendships that may have been pushed aside. They spend time exploring who they are outside the role of caregiver, rescuer, or emotional support system. As this happens, their identity begins expanding beyond the pain they experienced. The super empath starts recognizing strengths they never fully appreciated before. They realize they survive situations that would have broken many people. They recognize their resilience. They recognize their courage. They recognize their ability to endure challenges while still maintaining compassion. What once felt like weakness now reveals itself as strength. Their capacity to love deeply was never the problem. The problem was giving that love to someone who did not know how to value it. With every step of healing, their confidence grows. They begin trusting their instincts again. They stop second-guessing every decision. They learn to listen to their inner voice rather than constantly seeking validation from others. This renewed confidence creates a noticeable change in the way they carry themselves. They become calmer, they become more secure, they become less dependent on external approval. For the narcissist, this transformation can be difficult to understand. The narcissist often assumes that the super empath will remain emotionally attached indefinitely. They expect lingering pain. They expect ongoing emotional investment. They expect to occupy a permanent place in the super empath's thoughts and feelings. They may believe that the relationship defined the super empath's sense of worth, but healing disrupts those expectations. As the super empath grows stronger, the narcissist gradually loses significance in their life story. The focus shifts away from what was lost and toward what is being built. The super empath becomes more interested in creating a meaningful future than reliving a painful past. This is where true freedom begins. Freedom is not forgetting what happened. Freedom is not pretending the experience never occurred. Freedom is not denying the lessons learned. Freedom is reaching a point where the past no longer controls the present. The super empath no longer wakes up thinking about proving something to the narcissist. They no longer measure their worth through the lens of someone else's opinion. They no longer feel compelled to explain, justify, or defend themselves. Their energy is directed toward growth rather than conflict. As they continue moving forward, opportunities begin appearing that were previously hidden by emotional exhaustion. New relationships emerge, new goals take shape, new experiences bring joy and fulfillment. Life becomes larger than the pain they once carried. The narcissist may struggle with this reality because it challenges the narrative they created. They may have assumed the super empath could not thrive without them. They may have believed their influence would last forever. They may have expected the super empath to remain stuck, waiting, or emotionally dependent. Instead, they witness something entirely different. They witness a person becoming stronger. They witness a person becoming wiser. They witness a person becoming more confident. They witness a person creating happiness that does not rely on their presence. What makes this especially powerful is that the super empath does not achieve this through bitterness or revenge. They achieve it through growth. They choose healing over resentment. They choose self-discovery over obsession. They choose peace over prolonged conflict. The process is gradual. Some days are easier than others. There may be setbacks, doubts, and moments of sadness. Healing rarely follows a straight line, yet every step forward contributes to a stronger foundation. Every lesson learned increases self-awareness. Every boundary established reinforces self-respect. Eventually, the super empath reaches a point where they no longer define themselves by what happened to them. They define themselves by who they became because of it. The pain that once felt overwhelming becomes part of a larger story of resilience and transformation. The wounds that once seemed impossible to heal become evidence of strength. The experience that once threatened to diminish them becomes the very thing that teaches them their value, their courage, and their capacity to rise. And as they continue moving forward with confidence, purpose, and peace, they demonstrate a truth that no manipulation can erase. A healed super empath is no longer searching for permission to thrive because they have finally discovered that their future belongs to them.